Hitler promised Stalin territory. In the secret pact, Germany and the Soviet Union agreed to divide Poland between the two. They also agreed that the USSR could take over half of Finland and the Baltic countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. After signing this non-aggression pact, Hitler quickly moved ahead with plans to conquer Poland. His surprise attack took place on September 1, 1993 in the morning. France and Great Britain declared war on Germany on September 3rd. The German invasion of Poland was the first test of their newest military strategy called the Blitzkrieg. On September 17th, Stalin sent troops to occupy the eastern half of Poland.
In May of 1940, Hitler swept through the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. This was part of the strategy to strike at France. After reaching the French coast, the German forces went north and joined other German groups in Belgium. By May 1940, the Germans had trapped the Allied forces. Outnumbered, outgunned, and pounded from the air, Allies retreated to a port city called Dunkirk. Following Dunkirk, resistance in France began to crumble. On June 14th, the Germans had taken Paris, and on June 22nd, 1940, the French leaders surrendered.
Americans were split between whether or not they should join the war or be a part of it. Congress passed a series of acts called the Neutrality Acts that made it illegal to sell arms or lend money to nations in war. President Roosevelt knew if Allies fell, the U.S. would soon be dragged into war. The Lend-Lease Act was passed in March of 1941, which allowed President Roosevelt to lease arms and other supplies to countries vital to the U.S. in war. The U.S. began escorting British ships carrying these U.S. arms. On September 4th, a German U-boat fired at a U.S. destroyer, and the U.S. now joined the war.
By October 1940, Americans had cracked one of the codes the Japanese had used to send secret messages. They were well aware of the Japanese plans for Southeast Asia. If Japan captured European colonies there, it could also threaten the American-controlled Philippine Islands and Guam. To stop the Japanese advance, the U.S. government sent aid to strengthen Chinese resistance. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Japan's greatest naval strategist, called for an attack on the U.S. fleet in Hawaii. Early in the morning of December 7, 1941, American soldiers at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii awoke to the roar of explosives. A Japanese attack was underway. More than 2,300 Americans were killed.
Lightly defended, Guam and the Wake Island quickly fell to Japanese forces. The Japanese turned their attentions to the Philippines. In January 1942, they marched into the Philippines capital, Manila. The Japanese took the Bataan Peninsula in April. The Japanese also continued their strikes against British possessions in Asia. After a couple months, Japan had taken control of more than 1 million square miles of Asian land. About 150 million people lived in this vast area. The Japanese had quickly made it clear they were conquerors. The Japanese treated their new colonies with extreme cruelty.
The Japanese seemed unbeatable. The Allies, mainly Australia and America, were anxious to strike back in the Pacific. The United States wanted revenge for Pearl Harbor. In 1942, Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle bombed Tokyo and other Japanese cities. The bombs did little damage. However, an important point was made. The Doolittle raid on Japan raised morale for the Americans and shook the Japanese. Some Japanese believed that controlling a vast empire spread their troops too thin. In the Battle of the Coral Sea, opposing ships didn't fire a single shot. Instead, airplanes would shoot the ships and bomb them. However, the Allies had many troops killed, but it was a victory for the Allies because they had stopped Japan's southward advance.
To gain support for his racist ideas, Hitler knowingly tapped into his hatred for Jews that had a deep root in European history. For many generations, many Germans, along with other Europeans, had targeted Jews as the cause of their failures. Nazi made the targeting of Jews a government policy. The Nuremberg Law, passed in 1935, deprived the Jews of their rights to German citizenship and forbade marriages between Jews and non-Jews. On November 9th, Nazi stormtroopers attacked Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues across Germany and murdered close to 100 Jews. By the end of 1939, a number of German Jews had fled to other countries. However, many Jews stayed in Germany, and Hitler conquered many territories in which millions of more Jews lived. When Hitler found out that he couldn't get rid of Jews through immigration, he ordered Jews in all his countries to be moved to designated cities called ghettos. These Nazis sealed off these ghettos with barbed wire and stone walls and hoped that Jews inside would starve to death or die from disease. However, many Jews were able to hold on.
Hitler soon began to grow impatient for Jews to die from starvation or disease. He decided to take more of a direct action. It was called the final solution. To protect the Aryans, Hitler eliminated other races, nationalities, or groups they viewed as inferior. As Nazi groups swept across Eastern Europe, the killing began. They would move town to town, taking Jews to labor camps. These camps were located mainly in Germany and Poland. Hitler hoped that the perfect conditions in the camps would speed up the total elimination of Jews. Guards would severely beat or kill the prisoners for not working hard enough. The Nazis built huge extermination camps equipped with huge gas chambers that could kill as many as 6 million humans. Once the prisoners arrived at Auschwitz, they would tell the prisoners to get in showers when really they were gas chambers. Some 6 million European Jews died in these death camps and in Nazi massacres.
In 1943, the Allies began building a secret invasion force in Great Britain. Their plan was to launch an attack on German-held France across the English Channel. By May 1944, the invasion force was ready. Thousands of planes, ships, tanks, and landing crafts, and more than 3 million troops awaited the order to attack. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was the commander of this force, and he claimed to strike the coast of Normandy. The Germans knew the attack was happening, but they did not know where. To keep Hitler guessing, a fake army was made. The invasion of Normandy was the largest land attack in history. The invasion began on June 6, 1994. By September, they had liberated France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. They then set their sights on Germany on April 30th. Hitler and his wife committed suicide on May 7, 1945. General Eisenhower accepted the surrender.
Although war in Europe was over, the Japanese were still fighting allies in the Pacific. By the fall of 1944, the Allies were moving on to Japan. In October, Allied forces landed on Leyte in the Philippines. The Japanese devised a bold plan to halt the Allied advance. They would destroy the American fleet, thus preventing the Allies to resupply their ground troops. Within 4 days, the Japanese Navy had lost a disastrously amount, eliminating them as a fighting force in the war. The Japanese used kamikazes or suicide bombers filled with bombs to sink Allied ships by crashing into the ship. In March 1945, after a month of bitter fighting and heavy loss, American Marines took Iwo Jima. On June 21st, the bloodiest battle in history ended. The Japanese lost over 100,000 troops and the Americans lost 12,000. President Truman gave the go to use the atomic bomb on the Japanese, and the bomb was dropped on August 6, 1945. Over 70,000 people were killed from the bomb. The Japanese finally surrendered to General Douglas MacArthur on September 2nd.
By the end of World War II, Europe was in ruins. Close to 40 million Europeans died. A few of the great cities of Europe, Paris, Rome, and Brussels, remained largely undamaged by war. The Battle of Britain left parts of London destroyed. Warsaw, the capital of Poland, was almost completely destroyed. In 1939, Warsaw had a population of nearly 1.8 million people. When the Soviet soldiers entered the city in January 1945, only 153,000 people remained. Some citizens lived in partially destroyed homes or apartments. Others lived in cellars or caves made from rubble. There was no food, no water, or electricity. The misery in Europe continued for years after the war. The wars had ruined Europe's countrysides, and agriculture had completely been disrupted.
The defeat suffered by Japan in World War II left the country in ruins. 2 million lives were lost. The country's major cities were largely destroyed by bombing raids. The atomic bomb had turned Hiroshima and Nagasaki into blackened wastes. The Allies had stripped Japan of its colonial empire. General Douglas MacArthur, who had accepted the Japanese surrender, took charge of the U.S. occupation of Japan. MacArthur was determined to be fair and not plant seeds for future wars. Nevertheless, to ensure that peace would prevail, he began a process of demilitarization, or disbanding the Japanese armed forces. After a while, MacArthur then turned his attention to democratization, the process of creating a new government elected by the people. In February 1946, he and his American political advisors drew up a new constitution. It went into full effect on May 3, 1947. MacArthur was told not to revive the Japanese economy.